In the early years of World War II, the Atlantic Ocean wasn't just a body of water. It was a killing field. Night after night, German U-boats slipped beneath the waves, hunting Allied supply ships with near-total freedom. They didn't need to win every battle. They just needed to sink enough ships to slowly starve Britain into surrender. And for a while, it was working. Merchant crews called it the Black Pit, a stretch of ocean where ships vanished without warning, beyond the reach of Allied air cover. To the men aboard those freighters, the ocean felt alive, hostile, and watching. To German submarine commanders, it felt like dominance. What made the U-boats so effective wasn't just their torpedoes. It was invisibility. Early Allied radar systems were clumsy and weak, especially at sea. They struggled in bad weather, couldn't spot small objects, and were almost useless at night. U-boats exploited this perfectly. They surfaced after dark to recharge their batteries, confident that the sky above was blind. As long as they stayed quiet and timed their movements well, they were ghosts. Untouchable. And every week they proved it by sending more ships to the bottom. Inside Britain, the situation was desperate. Food imports were dropping. Fuel reserves were shrinking. Churchill openly admitted that the U-boat threat terrified him more than anything else in the war. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with more ships or bigger guns. Britain didn't have the luxury of brute force. What it needed was vision. Literally. The ability to see in the dark. And that's where the story takes a turn almost no one saw coming. In a small, unremarkable laboratory, a group of scientists were wrestling with a problem that sounded almost impossible. How do you generate powerful radio waves short enough to detect small objects, using equipment light enough to fit inside an aircraft? The answer came in the form of a strange-looking metal device with hollow chambers carved into it. It wasn't elegant. It didn't look like a weapon. But it worked. This was the cavity magnetron. And it could produce high-frequency microwave radiation far more powerful than anything before it. Here's the part that still feels unreal. It was cheap. Shockingly cheap. While nations were spending fortunes on tanks and battleships, this device could be manufactured for around £10. No exotic materials. No massive factories. Just clever physics and precise engineering. And yet, this modest little invention unlocked something revolutionary. Compact airborne radar that could detect a submarine's conning tower even in pitch black conditions, even through clouds and rain. Almost overnight, the balance of power began to shift. Aircraft that once flew blindly over endless ocean were now hunters. Darkness, fog, and rough seas, the U-boats' greatest allies, became liabilities. German commanders didn't realize it yet, but the ocean had betrayed them. The sky was no longer empty. It was watching. What makes this moment so chilling is that nothing about the U-boats themselves had changed. Their tactics were the same. Their crews were skilled. Their confidence remained intact. But the rules of the game had been rewritten. A £10 device had quietly stripped them of their greatest advantage. The Atlantic was no longer a place where submarines could vanish at will. It had become a transparent battlefield. And the hunters were about to discover they were no longer invisible. And this was only the beginning. The cavity magnetron didn't just help win the Battle of the Atlantic. It introduced a new era of warfare. One where information, detection, and technology mattered more than armor or firepower. An era where survival depended not on how strong you were, but on whether you could stay unseen. What made the cavity magnetron so devastating wasn't the explosions it caused, but the silence that came before them. German U-boat crews never felt a battle approaching. There was no warning siren, no radar ping, no moment to prepare. For decades, submariners had trusted one rule above all others. If you couldn't be seen, you couldn't be killed. The ocean was their shield. Night was their camouflage. And for a long time, that belief kept them alive. But once magnetron-powered radar entered the fight, that rule quietly died. U-boats had to surface regularly. Their batteries couldn't last forever, and diesel engines needed air. Surfacing at night had always been safe. Allied aircraft were blind in the dark. And the vastness of the Atlantic made the odds of being spotted feel almost laughable. Crews stood on deck, smoked cigarettes, chatted, and breathed fresh air, convinced they were alone. What they didn't know was that Allied planes were now sweeping the sea with invisible microwave beams, scanning hundreds of square miles in total darkness. The moment a radar screen flickered, everything changed. Pilots didn't see a submarine with their eyes. They saw a bright echo on a glowing screen. A solid shape where nothing should exist. A conning tower. A steel hull. A target. And because the Magnetron made radar small and powerful enough to fit into aircraft, these encounters happened fast. By the time a U-boat crew realized they'd been detected, it was usually too late. Diving took precious seconds. Seconds they no longer had. Depth charges didn't explode like in the movies. They crushed. They shook metal apart. They turned pressure into a weapon. Entire submarines were ruptured in an instant, plunging crews into darkness, freezing water, and chaos. Many sailors died without ever knowing why they had been found. Survivors later described the horror of realizing that hiding no longer worked, that something unseen was reaching through the night and pointing directly at them. By the end of the war, over 30,000 German submariners were dead. That's nearly 3 out of every 4 men who served in the U-boat fleet. It remains one of the highest casualty rates of any military branch in modern history. And what's haunting is how many of those deaths were tied, directly or indirectly, to a technology the victims never understood. German command suspected better radar existed, but they underestimated it. They believed Allied systems were still limited, still clumsy. That false assumption proved fatal. The psychological impact was just as devastating as the physical losses. U-boat captains began reporting something terrifying. The sense that the ocean itself was hostile. Surfacing felt dangerous. Night no longer brought relief. Crews were tense, exhausted, paranoid. Every shadow felt like death waiting above them. Morale collapsed as submarines failed to return from patrol after patrol. The hunters had become the hunted, and they didn't know how. What's even more chilling is that the Magnetron didn't just defeat U-boats. It changed warfare permanently. This was one of the first moments in history where detection mattered more than destruction. The side that could see first didn't just gain an advantage. It gained control. Radar turned information into a weapon. And the cavity magnetron was the key that made it practical, portable, and unstoppable. Long after the war ended, the same technology evolved into systems that guide missiles, track aircraft, and yes, eventually heat food in microwave ovens. But in the Atlantic, its legacy is written in silence. In steel hulls scattered across the ocean floor. In thousands of men who went to sea believing darkness would protect them, only to discover that the future of war had already arrived. And it could see straight through them. The Magnetron never fired a shot. It didn't need to. It simply erased the one thing submarines depended on most, the ability to hide.